Well, good afternoon and welcome to our March Ranching 101 webinar presented by AgTrust. Today, you will hear from an industry expert who will share essential strategies for managing forages and pastures for spring growth. But before we start, please join me for a short message from AgTrust.
Passion is agriculture and a rural way of life. You need a partner who understands. That partner is AgTrust Farm Credit, formed from two trusted farm credit associations. Our mission is to provide personalized financing tailored for full and part-time farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, and rural homeowners. And because we live in the communities we serve, AgTrust Farm Credit is here to help you succeed.
Today, we are excited to have Sarah Jane Abadi join us today as our guest speaker. Sarah Jane is a range nutritionist with High Pro Feeds. She combines expertise in ruminant nutrition and range science to support sustainable high-performance beef production on native and improved rangeland systems. She focuses on water quality, forage nutrient evaluation, reproductive performance, and calf health to design targeted supplemental feed and mineral programs. Rooted in sound science and practical application, her work is tailored to the logistical and economic realities of today's working ranches. She is passionate about helping ranchers make informed nutritional decisions that support their livestock, their land, and their bottom line. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the chat box or the Q&A box below. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Jane.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bryn. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, and this is very odd for me. I'm sure you hear that from every presenter. But I'm very excited to be here today. I want to thank TSCRA and Bryn for having me on to talk about just our spring considerations as we move into a new season out of winter feeding. The light is here at the end of the tunnel, guys. And again, thank you to the sponsor that is allowing us to have this presentation today. So I'm going to get into it and share my screen. This is going to be super weird because I talk with my hands and I'll just be talking to myself with my hands over here. So we'll get this screen shared up. All right. And as we go through this presentation, please submit your questions to Bryn because I can't see any of my Zoom screen while we're doing this. So, like Bryn said, I'm a range nutritionist. I work for High Pro Feeds, which is a feed company based out of Friona, Texas. We do serve all over the state of Texas, and we have several feed mills across the state and in Oklahoma and in New Mexico as well. So a couple of caveats that I'd like to say before I get into this. If I talk about a topic or an idea today that does not apply to your ranch, you're right. I'm not here to preach the word of God or Holy Writ. If you have different observations on your ranch, you're right. And so I do work in the realm of observation as well as science, of course, but we want to talk about some generalities about grass that can be applied to all grass types. And we will get into some specifics later on throughout the presentation. The other thing I like to tell people is that there's no such thing as a stupid question, only people who make you feel stupid. And I'm not one of those people. So please ask your stupid questions. Let's talk about it. Let's get you answers to your questions. I don't want you to leave here today without answers. So first and foremost, what is a range nutritionist? Well, I kind of made up the word, and this is a, let's see, let me hide this. I don't know if that's sharing or not too. This is a sketch drawn by a former professor at New Mexico State that I just love. And here I am somewhere between the hippies and the cowboys. I combine range science and I study the land, and I create diets for cow-calf operations based on their basal forage diet. What that looks like is me walking across a pasture and taking a grass sample. And so we do that subjectively. It is, I call it the Mills method, named after Kent Mills, who developed it back in the early 80s and perfected it throughout his career. basically we mark an invisible transect on a pasture and use several different pasture samples on any given ranch. And I walk this invisible transect, not too different from the way the NRCS does their transects for plant population estimates and things like that. So I walk this invisible transect because I'm not pounding T-posts on your ranch. and I mark it on a GPS. And as I'm walking across this pasture, I am picking plants that I think the cow will eat at that particular time. So the species that I pick, the amount of each one does vary by the season and how much of the population of that plant species is actually present. I send it off for testing, kind of like a hay sample, and I get that back. I'm able to put it into a model that predicts deficiencies, it predicts performance, and it also predicts the economics of it, like cost per pound of gain, cost per head per month, things like that. And then I'm able to develop a feed program using different supplements of your choice, mineral. I use your water quality as well, because we know that that can affect especially our mineral intake. So it's a service that Hypro offers to all of our customers. I do like to start off my talks with my State of the Union talk, and that's just to give you an idea of what's going on in the grass and what we're seeing in this year compared to previous years. So this year we are seeing lower overall protein rates, protein levels, and we'll get into why that's happening. But if you've noticed that you've been feeding more or your cows are not looking as good as they did this time last year, that is what's going on. And they're more protein deficient than they have been in the last couple of years. The energy levels are trending lower, but they are, I know that average is it does not show that it's lower, but in my observations, it is trending lower because the grass is a little bit older this year. But energy behaves a little bit differently than protein does. And we have slightly less volume of forage this time of year than we did last year. And that is because we did not receive as much fall rain as we typically as we have the last 2 years. So unfortunately, hopefully we get some rain soon. Today's discussion, we're going to talk about how grass grows and something that I like to call grass mileage. So hopefully that'll kind of paint a good picture for you guys. It's a good visual, I think, going forward, as every year is different, and some years will receive rain in the spring, sometimes you won't. We'll get into mineral intake. We'll talk about some monoculture grazing and how to control some of our fast spreading, I hate to use the word invasive, species that we see commonly across Texas. And if we have time, some digestive and nutritional issues that are common in the springtime. So how does grass grow? Pretty introductory. This is probably not news to any of you producers out there, but I just want to make sure we all kind of start from the ground up with a good base for today's discussion. So the first goal of a plant is to create leaf material, and these leaves are going to be the solar panels of the plant, with the root system really being our battery. So our first goal, if we're a plant, we want to produce as many leaves as possible so that we can, in turn, store a bunch of energy in our root system so that we can come back next year. And this is more particular to perennial plants that regenerate from their root systems every year. Our second goal, though, is to create a seed head. Now, perennial plants and a lot of our native grass species actually have really poor reproduction from seed growth. I think the actual viability of plants growing from like a blue grandma seed are 10 to 20%. So thankfully, these are perennial species and they're able to come back from their root systems every year, and we don't have to rely on seed production, but it is an important component if you're trying to improve a pasture. So that's our second goal. Our first goal is always triggered by the soil temperature and soil moisture. So for example, here in the Panhandle, we really won't see our short grasses like buffalo grass and blue grama grass come on until about the first part of April. And that may be coming a week, or let's say middle of April. That may be coming a week or so sooner this year. Yesterday, it was like a high of 54, and on Saturday, it's supposed to be a high of 95 here. So we may be seeing some earlier grass growth this year, which could be a good thing. Goal 1, as we're grazing, we are interrupting that goal of producing as much leaf power, solar panel power as possible. That leaf production can be stunted or halted if it stops raining and the plants run out of soil moisture. And then at that point, the plant will use whatever energy reserves it has to create a seed head if it can. So every year is different. Sometimes you get big, tall plants with big, tall seed heads. Sometimes you get little bitty plants with little bitty, short seed heads that are only maybe 5-6 inches tall if it's a buffalo or a blue grama grass. Now, as we decrease our soil temperatures going into the winter time, I mentioned earlier that energy behaves a little bit differently than protein does. As soil temperature decreases, that initiates a perennial plant to say, hey, we need to start storing our energy in our root systems and outside of our leaves. So they will then transpose that energy from above the soil and to under the soil into their root system. And that's a kind of a gradual process. We don't typically see like huge drops of energy like we would see huge drops in protein as we go into winter and winter dormancy. So plants are unique in that they have cell walls. So we as humans and animals, they have skeletons, right, that hold our bodies upright. Plants have cell walls. Human cells do not have cell walls. So of that cell wall, here's a plant cell wall, or cell, excuse me, ish. It's made up of 3 main components, okay? And they do vary in digestibility. And this is where an animal on pasture forage land derives most of its energy. It's not going to be from starch and grains. It's going to be from the fiber parts of the plant. So the types of fiber do matter. The first one is going to be cellulose. Cellulose is the part of the plant. It's all these little, rings. It's the juicy part. This is the part of the plant that we can digest. Hemicellulose is the part of the plant that only a microbe can digest. So hemicellulose is represented here by these green fibers. And then, of course, we have the lignin here on the outside. Lignin is an indigestible component of the plant, and it is only digestible by one creature on Earth, and that is a termite. So over time, the digestibility of a plant will change in that it'll be mostly cellulose, very digestible when it's first greening up and coming along. Then it'll move into having more hemicellulose than cellulose. So then it becomes indigestible to monogastrics like us. And then eventually lignin will kind of take over this entire cell structure and make the plant indigestible overall, or just significantly less digestible. So we're going to talk about a couple of things that affect the digestibility of a plant. Effective rainfall. We'll talk about this first. I like this quote. The man who has a short pasture needs a rain much worse than his neighbor who has ample forage on the range. But when the rain comes, it does the least for the fellow who needs it the most. And this is a picture of me at my place years ago. I think we were almost 280 days without rain at this point. And there was a rainstorm coming in, and some old man told me that if I go do a rain dance in my trench coat, my slicker, that it would rain, and then a tornado hit a mile from my house. So I don't do that anymore. I do not recommend. Just do the Betty White method. Okay, so effective rainfall in order to grow grass. I believe that a lot of people have their own definitions of effective rainfall. This is mine. I think you need two rains to grow grass. The first rain needs to be at least half an inch. You have to prime the fuel pump, right? And so we need to saturate the soil as much as we can. So got to be at least half an inch to grow a noticeable amount of grass. But the second rain has to come within 10 days. And it can be almost any amount. The more, the better, of course. But that second rain has to come within 10 days to 2 weeks. And that second rain is what's going to grow the grass. Your moisture infiltration will vary by soil type, sandy types of soil versus clay types of soil, of course. And then, of course, your brush cover. If you've got a lot of tree cover, that's obviously going to miss the soil or the grass that's growing underneath some of those trees. But bare ground is the worst recipient for rain, because when that raindrop comes down at its high rate of speed from the sky and it hits a bare patch of soil, excuse me, not dirt. It seals it. It seals it. The raindrop splash actually seals that soil and does not allow for very much more infiltration after that, unfortunately. So two rains to grow grass. We need a first rain at least half an inch, second rain at least 1/10. And I like this quote from Frank Price. The better it gets, the faster it gets better in terms of your soil health and your forage growth. If you're able to get your soil covered up with anything, even if it's just litter, we can get more retention and infiltration from the rain and make it more effective. Okay, moving on to how different types of rain, rapid growth due to heavy rains versus the next one will be on drought here in a second, how that can affect the way a plant grows, and specifically back to its digestibility or indigestibility in providing energy to that cow. So one of the reasons that lignin will increase is due to height. So as that plant gets taller, it needs more standability, more structure, more skeleton. And so as that plant gets really tall, it will increase in lignin so that it can stand tall, because its goal isn't necessarily to be digestible to the cow. Its goal is to get as tall as it can, as fast as it can, and produce a seed head. So here is a fairly little dog in what is the tallest, most beautiful blue grama I have ever seen in my life. And this came after about an 8-inch rain in New Mexico on a ranch out there. And this stuff is about dang near 3 feet tall in this photograph. This grass did not test well at all. So it increased so much. It was so tall. It had so much lignin, even though this grass wasn't even it only took it maybe 4 weeks to get this tall. It really didn't test very well, unfortunately. So available energy will not decline. It just won't be as high to begin with in plants this tall. And protein as well. The plant grows so quickly in these types of situations that I'm sure you guys have seen, that there's just a lower overall concentration of protein. It's almost like the root system can't keep up with how fast the plant is growing, and can't uptake enough nitrogen to create as much protein in the plant. And so you guys have heard the term washy before. Some people will define washy as just really high moisture grass. This is how I define washy. It's just kind of washed out. It's just kind of just lowly concentrated throughout the plant when it grows this quickly. The good things about rapid growth effects, even though it's not testing very well at this point in protein and energy, even though it looks really good, we are increasing total volume for stockpiled forage. So we have grass. If we have grass, we have cows. And we're going to improve our overall root growth as well. The more grass we have on top of the soil, the more root system we have below the soil. I'm sure you guys have seen the photographs of the relativity of overgrazed pastures versus rotationally grazed pastures and grass height above the soil, and how that kind of looks in those really, really deep root systems. So on the other hand, drought and how it affects native grass. The other way that lignin increases, so indigestibility in grass increases, is with age. And grass can be green, it can be yellow, and it can be gray. I've seen yellow grass test very well. Green grass, of course, usually tests very well. But when the grass begins to turn gray like newspaper, it has about the same nutritional value as newspaper. So again, over time, our available energy will decrease. Just kind of what we ran into this past year going into winter. We didn't get a lot of fall rains, or a significant amount anyways, to grow a lot of new fresh forage going into winter. So right now where we stand, the forage we grew last spring that we're still grazing is very old at this point. Over time, with drought combined with grazing, you can shrink your root systems over time because there's no new leaves coming on. There's no new solar panels being built to recharge those batteries underground. But one of the misconceptions about drought is that it kills plants, and that's not totally true. It's indirectly killing plants, yes, but it's the heat. So over time during a drought, we have soil erosion around the base of the plant, around the crown point. And as that crown point becomes more exposed to the sun and we move into summertime, that is when we see true plant death due to the heat of that crown point literally just baking in the sun. Of course, over time, as we continue to graze, but we don't have any new forage growth, our limited dry matter will more greatly affect your performance than forage quality. I would rather have a whole bunch of this old stuff than nothing at all, because when we have nothing, obviously, when we have nothing at all, we don't have cows. And when cows aren't able to get full, they lose weight significantly faster than if they had even a severe protein deficiency or even a severe energy deficiency. Frost and snow. Snow does not have the same effect on grass as it does on cows. We love to see snow on the backs of cattle. We hate to see cold, wet cattle, but we hate to see snow on grass, particularly if it's green. So when it's green going into winter, and say we did in let's say 24, we got some good fall rains there. That grass was really green going into winter. If we had gotten a snow, that would have been detrimental to our protein levels, because that grass, those cell walls, are full of water, and water freezes when it expands. And I think that those cell walls burst, and the protein just literally leaches out onto the ground. So hate to see snow on green grass. Once it's cured out, it doesn't really affect it too terribly much. I want to talk about that freezing air temperature. So if you watch your grasses in the wintertime, as it starts to get colder at night, you'll see parts of the plant turn purple, right? So like on our side oats grama, or even our buffalo grasses and blue gramas, over time, there's a warm air buffer on top of the soil, okay? Because the soil is very warm. And over time, as the outside freezing air temperatures get lower and lower, it kind of shaves off a top layer of that warm air buffer. And see, here I am using my hands, and I don't know if you guys can see me or not. It shaves off the top of that warm air buffer and gets closer and closer to the ground. So after your first freeze, it's always neat to go out and look outside and see at what point the leaf of the plant has turned purple. That's where it ends. So it'll be like the tip of the leaf to maybe an inch down the leaf, but the base 4 inches or so of that leaf will still be green. And that's what your warm air buffer looks like. And you can kind of measure that going through winter, as with each freezing night, you'll see that purple move down lower and lower to the soil level. Okay, so that's like the really boring stuff. Now we're going to get into the fun part, guys. Now that we've kind of talked about how plants behave, because they behave similarly everywhere, as opposed to talking about specific plants. So we've talked about lignin a lot, and total forage digestibility. And we're going to talk about manure scoring. So we're familiar with this. I score manure on a scale of 1 to 3. Some people do it on a scale of 1 to 5. It's just a little overly complicated for me. So in overall, your number 2 should always be a number 2. Okay, they call it a cow pie for a reason. It should look like a pie. So in score number 1, this is a type of manure that is mostly associated with like this time of year, forage green up. If you got some winter annuals coming on, if you do have some green grass coming on, if you are a little more south in the state than I am, or if you're on wheat pasture, this type of manure is very loose, and it's indicative of high protein and low fiber. Okay, so very green, very digestible forages. Number 2 is perfect balanced diet. We don't have such a high rate of passage that we're missing out on any nutrients. So we have a good balanced diet if that pie looks like a pie. But number 3, and this will be important for, now I know we're coming off a winter now, but this will be more important for you going into next winter, is manure stacking. So the way I was taught, and for years, is that this is a protein deficiency. This is absolutely, if you see this, you got a protein deficiency. That's not necessarily true. In the work that I do, I have found that energy deficiencies are 4 times more common than protein deficiencies. And if you kick these manure pies open, you will see long pieces of grass in there. That is indigestible fiber. So if you're seeing that much indigestible fiber pass through the system into the cow and it allows for their manure to have that much structure to it, that should tell you that there's less energy available, because again, the animal is deriving most of its energy from the plant fibers, depending on which type of fiber it is. So that's what it tells me when I'm looking at stacked manure. And you can take this next rule of thumb with you into next wintertime. I examine I take grass samples, right? But it still takes time to send those off to the lab and everything like that. And so that's one way to stay on top of your deficiencies. Another way is to wait until your cattle are losing weight and then you're behind the 8 ball. So don't do that. Manure scoring is the fastest, surest, best way for you to figure out if you have an energy deficiency or if you're behind kind of the 8 ball on feeding your cows what they need. So my rule of thumb with this is to go out and examine a common place, a high traffic area like around a water source, and only look at the fresh pies that are there from the last 24 hours or so. If more than 50% of those are stacking, you need to increase your supplementation, right? Because we feed for the bell curve. That's the most economic place to feed for a herd. We're not going to feed for the hard doers, and we're not going to feed for the easy keepers. We're going to feed for the middle. So if more than 50% of your cows have very stacked manure, you know that more than 50% of your cows are experiencing an energy deficiency. So if you're going to begin supplementation, start at 7 pounds a week. If you're going to increase supplementation, say you're already feeding 14 pounds a week, bump that up to 18 pounds a week is kind of my rule of thumb there. All right. So I have put together this little calendar of how I view the world. And so that may not be applicable to where you live, but you can kind of adjust the calendar to fit you and your operation. So we'll start with January to March, which is where we are right now. Typically, any of our moisture here benefits our cool season annuals. That's going to be different this year with how warm it is getting, because our grasses need warmer soil temperatures than our weeds do. And I say weeds very lovingly. A weed is just a plant out of place, as Kent Mills used to say, a plant whose purpose has not yet been discovered. So typically, if we get a rain in March, I know we're going to have a lot of annual broomweed. We're going to have a lot of mare's tail, kochia weed, things like that. And what's going to happen is that those weeds are going to get a jump start on our grasses because they can tolerate lower soil temperatures, and they're going to use up a lot of that soil moisture that's there. In April to July, I'd call this our true growing season. We have to grow grass here. If we don't, we're going to be looking at destocking and moving cattle around in places we don't necessarily want to use at that time. So this is our true growing season. Most of our forage does grow here. We have long, warm days, lots of sunlight, just bodes to a lot of solar panel development at that point. Then we get into July and August, hot summer, hot, dry. Quality typically declines here, kind of gradually over time. It just gets cured out, but it can come back in the late summer, early fall with some of our monsoon type rains. And I call this our greening season. We don't grow enough forage here to sustain the annual needs of a cow in terms of forage volume, but it does, if we get a rain here, it does improve the quality of the grass significantly so that we can really take a lot of protein with us into the wintertime. This is what we did not have last year. So majority of our grasses are old right now. There were grazing grasses we grew last April and May and June. And we did not get the late green up. We didn't get that boost in forage protein, that boost in forage energy with new viable growth that is very digestible. So that's why we're seeing lower protein levels this year. And lastly, as we go into winter, we're not going to grow anything necessary of much production value. If you are lucky enough to have winter annuals like Texas wintergrass or some brooms, those can be grazed and can be very beneficial. I call Texas wintergrass our wintertime savior. Sometimes it kind of waits to the last minute to come on, but it is a necessary boost in protein if you're lucky enough to have some of that on your place. But ultimately, the forages are dormant, and that's part of their natural life cycle. I do believe that they need to go dormant in the wintertime in order to continue being sustainable throughout the rest of the season and doing what they're supposed to do. The pit of despair. I forgot that was in here. So the pit of despair, unfortunately, is right about the beginning end of October-ish. And that's where a lot of things can change. So I like to think of our winter feeding season as a 1,000-mile road trip, as a big, long road trip. And right there at about October, we've either received our fall rains or we haven't. And now we're in the pit of despair because we don't know what we're going to be driving that winter, because we don't know if we're going to get an early frost or an early snow or a late snow or a late frost. I consider an early frost to be before Thanksgiving and an early snow to be before Christmas, but that's just for particular here in the Panhandle. That may be different wherever you are. So the pit of despair. So this road trip that we're going on, it can be a little bit daunting. By this time, you've already contracted your feed typically. And so you're kind of stuck with whatever you contracted, but you don't know what the weather's going to do. So on this road trip, you might be handed the keys to either any one of these three pickups. Apart from cows and grass, the only thing I could possibly love as much as those things is my trucks. I'm a Ford girl, as you can tell, and I'm a little bit of an amateur gearhead. So we have my 1966 F-250. Her name is Fancy because she was born just plain white trash. And then this is my Hi-Pro pickup that they so generously let me drive around to these ranches. And then, of course, down here, I've got my dually for when I have to do real work. And yes, Ford has been known to stand for Found on Roadside Dead, of which this was. If you can tell, my hood is actually popped right there because my alternator quit me while I was pulling a load of cattle. Super fun. So let's think of this road trip and our forage quality as our miles per gallon. A lot of factors go into your miles per gallon, just like a lot of things will affect your forage quality, as we've discussed, either rapid growth or drought, the timing of those rains, the amount of rains that we're going to get. So what does that look like visually? All right, so on this road trip, we're in the pit of despair, and we only have a spring rain that year. So this is kind of indicative of this past winter the winter we're currently having. The spring rain, we got that spring rain. We grew a lot of forage. It was great, but we did not get into that fall green up. So we're going to have an old and slow season feeding. It's old and slow. So it's better than walking. But we've got some of that old grass and we are going to have to feed quite a bit. This truck has a 12-gallon tank and gets like -3 miles to the gallon. So when we're driving this truck, we are having to supplement a lot. This truck will go anywhere except past a gas station at that point. Okay, in 24, we experienced a year like this where we had heated and cooled seats, satellite radio, all the things, where we had a spring rain, in which we grew all of our quantity, and a fall rain that allowed us to grow some of our quality. Okay, we got some of that powerhouse back into that grass, a lot of protein and energy, easy money. This is easy living. Not a lot of not as heavy supplementation typically in that winter 24-25 as we have had this year. Now we get into what happens when we have no spring rain. So we grew no quantity. We got some fall rain. So we did have some good quality going into this, whatever this year might have been. So we had a lot of power, but it's still a short road trip. We still have to refill, not many so we don't have to supplement quite as much as we do here in terms of quality supplement. But ultimately, even with twin tanks, we might run out of fuel on this road trip just because we don't have enough forage volume. And so in that aspect, we may have to move into something that we call substitution. And that may be a type of year where you're feeding a lot of hay, but additional protein supplementation on top of that may not be super high. So then we pull in another factor, our little 2-horse straight load dual axle trailer. So we can pull this trailer is going to represent a late snow. Okay. And again, late snow for me after Christmas, January 1st. We do expect to have a snow. We do expect to have a winter. We hope to have a winter. And we're driving a pickup. So we bought the pickup because we expect to have to pull something. So this is the trailer we expect to pull. And we can pull this trailer. We can deal with the late snow because we expect it. We can pull this with any of the trucks in our fleet, no matter what we're driving that year. However, if we get an early snow, okay, our grass here in this situation with an early rain and then an early snow, this grass is cured out, okay, going into winter. It's not green. It's not going to have severe protein leaching because the cell walls are bursting. And this is a 1-ton pickup. We could, I mean, like, I'm not going to do it, but you could probably pull that trailer with that pickup. It could probably get it done. So that's fine. We can handle it. That grass is already cured out. Okay, if we get an early rain and a late rain, so we have spring and fall rains, and then we get an early snow, well, it kind of will void out all of the new growth that we got that fall. So we're just stuck with our old growth, same situation. I actually did have a Mini Cooper at one point in my life, and it got 42 miles to the gallon. I did not get any respect while I was driving it. However, I did total it in my own driveway, in my own pothole, and that's the most expensive pothole I've ever had. Okay, so if we get an early snow and all we got was a late rain that year, so we really don't have any grass quantity, and we just had some good grass quality that was going to push us through the wintertime, and then an early snow comes and knocks it out because the protein bursts out of the cell walls and it leaches onto the ground. That's not happening. That's a worst case scenario. So kind of silly, but I hope that kind of paints a good visual that you can take into the wintertime when you go back at, contract season and you're reflecting on the types of rains that you've gotten and the type of grass that you've grown that can help you better predict what kind of supplements you might need if you're going to be super energy deficient because you have old grass, if you're going to be really protein deficient because you have had no new grass in the fall rains, things like that. All right. So we'll keep moving through the mineral. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the digestive issues. I was going to talk about like grass tetany and bloat and things like that at the end, Bryn. I don't know if I'm going to make it through that. I'm going to try to get it wrapped up here in the next 10 minutes. So I get asked a lot about mineral and what minerals to feed and how to pick a mineral. And I get a lot of calls about my cows are eating too much mineral. They're not eating enough mineral. And so I want to talk about what is normal. But first, I want to talk, that didn't show up at all. This slide says cattle will eat what they need. I want to declare out loud to the world that that's not true. It's a myth, and stop telling people that. Okay. So back in the 60s, there was a lot of research done, and I know it's making a comeback now, but there was a lot of research done on mineral feeders, like the mineral buffets, where you can give a cow or a ruminant animal phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, all the way down to your trace minerals, and that they'll eat what they need. And that was just proven back in the 60s. It's making a comeback now, and I don't know why, but it's not true. Cattle will not eat what they need of each mineral like that. They will eat salt and phosphorus for taste and to their requirements, but they will not eat other minerals. Not that they won't eat the other minerals if you put them out there, free choice, but they will not eat them in any correlation at all to what they need. And so that's just shrink. That's just money wasted. They'll eat it. I mean, yeah, my cows would eat a donut. It's not going to do anything for them. So cattle will eat phosphorus and salt for taste, which is why you see those two fluctuate so greatly on different mineral different products in the feed store or through different feed companies. It just depends on what kind of goal you're trying to achieve, because we can use those and manipulate those levels to manipulate their intake. And we call these our mineral intake drivers. It is perfectly normal for mineral intake to be lower during the green up or during cube supplementation than it is throughout the rest of the year. It's lower during the wintertime typically because there's a lot of phosphorus that's coming in through the cubes that we're feeding. And so it would be normal if we're feeding our cows mineral that they don't necessarily have to seek out as much phosphorus from the mineral because they're getting a lot through their feed. It's also very low, or should be lower, totally normal for it to be lower during the green up because the forage phosphorus levels are very high at that time. Alternatively, salt intake increases during the green up, because soil moisture, forage moisture, is so high that they need salt to balance the osmotic pressure within their body, because at some point they can almost be eating as much water as they're drinking. So this is just a little visual. As you increase the concentrations of salt, phosphorus, and magnesium, okay, so we can either call these limiters or drivers. Salt and phosphorus are our drivers. We commonly will use salt and magnesium as limiters. At some point, too much salt is just too much salt, and magnesium is very bitter. So you will see those kind of fluctuate as well. As each of these concentrations increase, overall intake will go down. So like if you're buying like a 12-12, a 12 phos, 12 calcium mineral, they will eat less of that because it's more highly concentrated than if you were feeding them something that was 7% phosphorus, just as an example. This is a graph of forage data, forage phosphorus levels, and cow-calf requirements for fall and spring calving cows throughout the year based on data that I've collected. I think this was over a 5-year span. I just pulled an average across native pastures. So here you can see where the phosphorus is exceeding the forage phosphorus, is exceeding the requirements of the cows in, let's see, in the spring and early summer. And then again, it can happen in the late fall, although it's not as common. So again, because it doesn't happen necessarily every year. So some years in a 5-year average, it was able to meet the requirements of the cow, but not exceed them like it did up here in the spring. This is our annual forage dry matter. Okay, so as the forage is very dry coming out of January. Okay, and then it gets much wetter. So it's lower in overall dry matter. It's higher in water. And these are typically the times of the year where we see higher salt intake. If you're listening to this and you go, well, I don't feed free choice salt and my cows eat mineral very well all year long, they don't drop off a mineral in the springtime like you're saying, Sarah Jane, you're right. And that is happening because they are actually seeking out salt in your mineral at that time. So back here, if you're not seeing your mineral intake drop off here and you're not feeding free choice salt, which is perfectly fine. It's a great insurance policy to make sure your cows are always getting their trace minerals. There's a lot to be said about copper intake during the first trimester, but that's for a different day. That's why they're actually going to be seeking out salt rather than phosphorus. So that's why we'll allow them to use salt as an intake driver at that point. Moving into a little bit of grazing, and then we'll wrap up because we definitely won't have time to talk about digestive issues. I guess I could hang on at the very end, Bryn, if folks wanted to, but shout out to Jenny Pluhart, the Texas Grazing Land Coalition. She's made she had this fabulous design created, and she's always said, if grazing management was easy, they'd call it rocket science. Okay, and I've always referred to grazing management as an art. Okay, and you guys are the artists. There's a million ways to skin this cat. You can do it differently than your neighbor and be just as successful. And if you're not plugged in with your local Texas GLC, Texas Grazing Lands Coalition group, I would encourage you to seek that out. This is one woman's opinion on monoculture grazing. So grazing different types of forage species if you happen to have a huge stand of it. A lot of these will get deemed invasive species. It's such a negative word. And then I also have an opinion about non-native invasive species versus native invasive species, because there's some non-native species like old world blue stems that cattle will actually eat versus native invasive species like meadow dropseed that nothing will eat at all. So I'm not so much of a grass purist that I hate old world blue stems. They can be manipulated and used in their peak grazing season, which is usually comes on about 15th of June and goes on into the middle of August or so. And you can really put some weight on some cattle. So you can mob graze that during its peak forage season. Love grass, you can do the same thing if you've got a bunch of love grass. It does do a little bit better in the wintertime than old world blue stems. It maintains its protein just a little bit better than our blue stems do. And so that may be a grass that I would want to hay or stockpile for winter. You can mob graze it though as well. Sand dropseed, oh, you just got to get on it and hammer it. With as many cattle as you can during peak grazing season. I'm not encouraging you to totally graze it out, but it can take over a pasture in just a matter of 4 or 5 years. And so it does need to be controlled, and cattle really don't want to go to it because the same time sand dropseed is growing, there's other more palatable grasses that they prefer. So they'll leave it alone, and you almost always see sand dropseed mature out because the cattle left it alone the whole time. So if you put a bunch of cattle together, they will have to eat it. And that's just one way to control the spread so that you can maintain your forage diversity. Meadow dropseed, nothing eats it, not even pigs. Burn it, send it back to hell where it came from. Tabosa, I've seen this burned successfully and then grazed, and I've seen cattle do over 2 pounds a day on fresh tabosa. So that's one way to do it. And then we have our annual grasses like brome and rescue grass. If you can mob graze these as well in the late winter, again, during their peak growing season, we can control the spread of that as well. And it's not so much that they're super invasive, it's that they get left behind, and they have such large seed heads, they have a higher rate of reproduction from seeds, and they're annuals, of course. But what happens is they continue to grow into the season, into May-ish, or not May, March and April, when all of our native short grasses are kind of coming on, and then the cattle will leave these annuals behind, and over time these annuals just come on in such a volume that they will litter the ground in a way that prevents our other grasses from being able to penetrate up through the ground. They just leave so much litter behind every year that they can really, it looks like there's just a mat of it out on your pastures, and our little bitty grasses just can't break through the soil surface sometimes, and it delays other forage growth because it keeps the soil cooler longer. It doesn't allow it to be exposed to the sun, so that our more preferred grasses like buffalo grass, blue grama cytos, they just can't break through. So as I wrap up, I'm going to go over, if you're not familiar with me, that's totally fine, but I am known to a few as the weird grass lady. So here's some weird grass lady feeding and forage wisdom. I don't like to use mineral to manipulate grazing. That's why God made protein tubs. Please don't hide your mineral from your cows. They really need it, and it's very expensive. Water is, I think water is severely underused as a rotational grazing tool. You can, if you have a big pasture and you're not able to cross fence it, or virtual fence it or anything like that, you can also turn waterers on and off on a pasture and use that to rotationally graze your cattle across different areas. Encourage you, if it's logistically feasible, to reserve your best pastures for your first calf heifers to calve on. And that is because they have a greater protein requirement at breeding for their second calf than a cow does. They are still growing themselves, and now they're raising a calf, and now you're asking them to get pregnant. So if you can keep those first calf heifers on your best pastures, you can increase your pregnancy rates and reduce your supplementation rates in some regards. I recommend rotating your feeding grounds annually. You don't have to feed in a different spot every week when you go out to feed, but so that you don't overgraze or graze out an area, would encourage you to do that. Recently heard Dwayne Lucia Tell people to use your feeding grounds to create fire breaks. If you are going to feed in the same place every year, that is a great idea. Along the fence line, along, your your southwest corners kind of thing where fire typically moves in from, fantastic idea. Feeding twice a week versus 3 times a week will increase your grazing. You're leaving those cattle alone longer, and they'll get out and they'll spread out a little bit more. So you can increase your grazing by being in your cattle a little bit less if logistically you can do that with your current supplementation rate. Only put out what you need in mineral for 2 weeks at a time. Instead of getting hung up on different types of mineral feeders to reduce shrink, just put out what you need for 2 weeks at a time. If they eat it in a week, fine. If they don't eat it in a week, put out a little bit less next week. But this is going to allow you to keep your mineral fresh, so that you can have the best intakes as possible, because this is essential to getting your cattle pregnant. This is essential to vaccine efficacy. Your cattle need mineral. So when you're doing this, don't go and put out 500 pounds of mineral or 300 pounds of mineral at a time. Just put out enough so that if the wind does blow it over, if it does rain, or a cow poops in it, like, it's not 300 pounds that have gone to waste. It's only 50 pounds or 100 pounds or so in those mineral feeders that has gone to waste. The other thing about mineral is that mineral is rocks. Rocks is mineral. Rocks always want to be a bigger rock. And there's only so much weatherproofing you can do to a mineral product before you also rumen proof it, right? We don't want to make it so hydrophobic that it lasts forever, but it also bypasses through the rumen. I have a bit of wisdom from Tom Black of the Reynolds Ranch. It's particularly pertinent to here in the Panhandle, to feed into the wind. That way, when you're going out to feed cattle, your siren is not carrying downwind, and you're not calling in your neighbor's cows, all the cows that you don't want to feed today, or the cows you fed yesterday. You can save your cattle some calories, which in turn saves you some supplementation. So feed into the wind. Feed is made a little bit differently throughout different times of the year based on humidity levels and outside air temperatures. We do that to reduce mold for you. We do that so that your cake doesn't bind up in your overhead bin. So you do need to calibrate your trip hopper with every load of feed that you get, because a 5-gallon bucket might not always weigh the same, and you think you're feeding 3 pounds and you might be feeding 4 pounds, or vice versa. There's a lot of good research out there that talks about evening feeding increasing daytime calving by 85%. 100% true. I only feed at night, and I always have daytime calves. If I have calves born in the dark, it's because it was like at 6 o'clock in the morning. But that is 100% wonderful research, and it is totally true. It'll save you a lot of headache. Last couple of things here. Let your cattle know that you have 2 legs. Sometimes they only see you on a horse, on a 4-wheeler, or in your pickup from the waist up. Let your cattle know that you got 2 legs. Get out of the pickup every once in a while. And my last one, a good favorite from an old friend, is that wheat pasture is for yearlings. I do not recommend calving on wheat pasture. That gets into a whole array of things. Wheat pasture is for yearlings. We don't have time to get into all this today, unfortunately. So I want to thank you guys for your time. Open it up for some questions. HiPro does have a YouTube channel, and I talk about a lot of these different subjects we've talked about today in little 1 and 2 minute videos. And that's what I've got for you guys. Sorry we ran through that. I should have left a little more time for questions. I apologize, but thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. It does look like we have some questions in the Q&A box, so I'll start asking them if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, first one. Have you seen any growth of tall fescue in Central Texas, or not cool enough?
I'm going to assume you mean, like, do we have tall fescue in Central Texas? I believe that we do. Predominantly down in, like, I don't know what county that is, but, like, maybe within a couple 100 miles of Mason, I think, is where a lot of it grows. And then I think as you get a little closer to the Louisiana border, I've not worked with fescue extensively in that part of the world. It will, and then on that question. If you're asking if it gets super tall, like everything else can grow really fast, really quickly, yes, it can.
Next question. What is one thing you can use as litter to help retain rainfall in your soil?
Oh, I guess if you've got bare ground, unroll an old hay bale, unroll an old round bale. Um, in different urban area parts of the world, I've seen people collect their leaves and try to do that. If you can just get organic material on top of the bare soil, when that raindrop hits, it'll hit those leaves and kind of disperse as opposed to one big raindrop, and then it'll kind of gradually filter through. So old round bales that are not good enough to feed to cattle anymore is a great way to do that.
Does pre-soaking seeds for 24 hours or 48 hours prior to planting help cow grass seed growth? Is that a good or bad idea?
Like soaking it to maybe kind of um, soften the exterior shell so that the endosperm doesn't have to work so hard to create. Um, huh. I don't know. In theory, it sounds like a great idea. In practice, I'm not enough of a seed guy to tell you the answer to that. I would recommend. I don't like to leave people without a person to answer that question. If I'm not the guy, I know a guy. Um, I would reach out to a buddy of mine. His name is Bryce Thomas out at Browning Seed. He can probably tell you the answer to that question. If you Google Browning Seed out of Plainview, Texas, ask for Bryce. He can probably tell you.
Great.
Sorry.
How long do I need to wait? 30 days or 90 days after cows leave my pasture before planting new grass seed on that same pasture? And then kind of like a two-parter because of the high nitrogen from cows number twos.
I would not be super concerned about the high nitrogen from number twos. That would actually be a little more beneficial. But I would not necessarily use the timing of the removal of the cattle as an indicator of when I should plant. I would want to plant long enough for. I think a lot of these seeds have to undergo cold stratification, and so I'd be more concerned with just the timing of the year, what season we're going into. I wouldn't want to plant it. I would think that would be I don't know the answer to that. I think it would have less to do with the timing of the removal of the cattle and more to do with the season of the year, what season is best to plant certain types of species of grass.
Okay.
Like, let me say this, like, I don't deal in a lot of reseeding of native pastures myself, but I've had a couple of customers do like beadall and spar and iron master type blue stems. And if I remember correctly, they're typically doing those in December, January. And then we're looking for the new forage growth in the spring.
Grazing recommendations on how to graze old gray little blue stem in the Mason, Texas area.
Old gray little blue stem. Okay, so I'm going to imagine that you have a lot of it and we need to mow it down somehow, preferably without diesel and tires, is what I'm going to guess you're doing on this question, that it's just been standing there for a long time. In that particular scenario, it's a great question. In that particular scenario, if you've got old standing forage that you need to get rid of so that you can allow other things to grow, or you just want to utilize it, that is a case of which I would use a high protein supplement. Feeding a low rate, so you wouldn't want to feed a 38% cube like you do a 20% cube. You don't want to do that. That's another talk for another day, but basically you can get into so much extra protein that you're putting that cow in like a ketotic keto diet state. So you can't supplement it like 5-6 pounds a day or whatever. Like you can't feed a whole bunch of it like you do a 20. But in that aspect, if we were to feed 2 or 3 pounds a day of a 38, 32 very high, a high protein supplement, we can increase that cow's total forage consumption by 3 or 4 pounds a day. If that's our goal and we have ample forage to do that, then you go with a higher protein diet. And so that protein is going to feed the microbes, feed the rumen, and allow for increased fiber digestion efficiency to an extent. And those cows are going to want to eat more. And so that's one way. You can do it with a tub. You can do it with high protein blocks. That's an excellent use of a high protein cube to graze those pastures so that they can essentially be improved.
Going back to the litter conversation, how thick should the litter layer be?
Haha. Oh, these are such interesting questions, you guys. One, I don't want it to be packed. Okay. I don't want it to be packed. I want it to be kind of just layered on there in a way that there's some sunlight exposure, right? But not so much that it stops anything else from growing up through it, that there's no sunlight exposure. So unpacked, loosely, if you can rake it too, that'd be awesome. Maybe about 2 to 3 inches, max 4 of loose. Like I don't want it to be like a mat though. If you can make it a fluffy 4 inches on, if you're talking about bare soil, that would help significantly. And it's not so much that it would then prevent the grasses from being able to grow up through it as well.
Can you use hay to help grow grass?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. One of the things that I do on my place, I do occasionally have to feed hay. Don't tell anybody that. Do as I say, not as I do. Like, have too many cows that have names. I only buy like silver blue stem. I don't buy like old CRP type hay necessarily unless it's got a lot of silver blue stem in it. That way they're kind of replanting it as they go along. Every once in a while, every couple of years, I can find blue grama and buffalo grass hay, which is really great. Buy it from a local guy here. If you can do that, those plant it and keep it in the family of the types of species of grass that you have. Absolutely. If you do have, like, if you go out and buy Bermuda grass, you can potentially grow some Bermuda grass on your pastures. If you, not so much wheat pasture, hay grazer will typically come up as hay grazer wherever you formerly planted it, because all that, wherever, or formerly fed it, excuse me. And that's a great example of how hay can be used to create a topsoil, or, a litter layer, topsoil layer is where your old hay feeding grounds are. Sometimes you can grow a lot of grass in those areas. So, but I don't like to use hay grazer hays, but they can come up as well. But yes, you can. Native grass seeds are super tiny, and they're not typically broken down by the cow's teeth. So if there is seed in your hay, they're not typically going to chew it. They can be digested by the microbes because they have a really thin endosperm layer, but if you can get it to come out into the manure, years from now, yes, it'll come back, but mostly just from the hay itself, that's where you're going to get your most forage growth, not necessarily passing through the cow and being deposited in the manure.
Right. So we've got 2 questions regarding shredding. Would you mind just commenting on shredding, and then does it make sense to shred a pasture every once in a while?
Oh, you guys are going to hate me. Super academic answer. It depends. It depends on what your goal is. If you are unable, especially from a point of fire protection, right? If you are unable to graze in a fire break, do whatever you need to do to protect your country from fire, even though there is a risk with shredding and creating a fire. I understand the sentiment of wanting beautiful pastures, paddocks, and mowing out those weeds and stuff. So I have a rule at my house that we're not allowed to mow below the seed head line. And my boyfriend hates it, but that's okay. I do all the mowing around here anyways. Um, I'm a little bit of a purist in that I will wait for those grasses to make a seed head, so that at least when I do go mow, I'm thrashing out seeds all over the ground, and not just like cutting off their opportunity to continue growing and produce that seed head. And then I'm able to cut the tops of the weeds off. So the great thing about mowing, so yes, shredding. I love shredding is fine. I do it really high up because grass grows from the crown point, okay, but weeds grow apically. So if you cut the top off a weed, it won't grow anymore. So if you can shred above your grass line for your weeds, that's what I would recommend doing. That's what I do. So the mare's tail, the kochia weed never really gets that tall out at my place because I mow above the grass line. Sometimes that may be almost a foot off the ground, but that I mow my plants, my weeds apically from the top.
Seed or sprig? Do you have a preference?
I am not familiar with being able to sprig anything else besides Bermuda grass, and I do recommend sprigging for Bermuda grass. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it in the way that gets that plant growing the fastest. If there is another plant that you can sprig, I'm not aware, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. I don't know. Seeding overall is a good place to start, but you can do a lot of great things with intentional grazing. If there is a plant you want to grow, don't graze that pasture, or don't try not to graze that part. You can manipulate grazing with a lot of things, and that's what I have found to be more successful than seeds. But I am also the guy that will go collect seeds in the bar ditch and try to get grass to grow. And I've collected hundreds of pounds of side oats grama seed to try to get that to grow on my pastures to compete in volume with the old world blue stem that grows on my pastures. And finally, after this will be 9 years, last year I found my first side oats plant from seed. So seeding can take a while. If we're talking about seeding and sprigging Bermuda grass, sprig it.
Just a few more questions if you still have time, Sarah.
I got all the time in the world. I can sit here all day. I got 100 more slides we can go through if you want to.
Great. Do you suggest loose mineral or mineral block and/or molasses tubs for supplemental feeding to dry grass in Kerr County, Hill Country area?
In Kerr County. Oh, Kerr County. Okay. Mineral and blocks. Loose mineral and block mineral. Total personal preference. Okay. Complete personal preference. You can have adequate, consistent intake on both. I would recommend a loose mineral, though, under particular circumstances. And actually, in Kerr County, it might be one of them, where it rains a lot. Okay. Blocks sometimes don't last as well. Once they've been rained on and baked and rained on and baked and rained on and baked, in a matter of a month, those cattle may tend to back off of them because the exterior is just not really palatable anymore. So if you're in a part of the world where it rains a lot, you might want to go to a loose mineral, which I know is maybe opposite thinking, right? Just make sure that you have leach holes in the bottom of whatever mineral feeder you're using. I do recommend a loose mineral if you have, if you're got non-native cattle. So you just got some cattle in, you just bought some cattle, whether they're yearlings, heifers, cows, bulls, whatever. I recommend a loose mineral because those cows were not raised on our place. So we may not know the true history, the true nutritional history of those cows. And that being said, you would want to straighten them out as much as they need as quick as possible, even if it's only a little bit. And with a loose mineral, they're more likely to accidentally eat a little bit more than they need or a little bit more than they wanted to eat than with a block. And with a block, when you're trying to straighten out cattle, golly, it just takes a long time to get to the center of a lollipop in that situation. And then grazing with molasses tubs in Kerr County to, what was it, to graze old forages, right? Using molasses tubs. Tubs are great. Molasses tubs are great for that. You could get them in an assortment of protein levels from 15% to 40%. He did say tubs, right? Or
Yes,
they did say tubs, right? Not liquid feed. Okay. Tubs are great. Blocks are great, especially throughout the winter time. Those tubs can be very highly effective. Now, if we're grazing those old forages in the winter time, it may not work all winter long well, they'll still graze all the forages all winter long, but we may have to also supplement to make sure we're getting them enough energy throughout the winter time. But if you're trying to eat on those forages in the springtime and there's a lot of old growth, but there's a little bit of new growth that's going to support their energy needs, then yeah, protein tubs work fabulously in doing that.
Right.
There's also some tub companies out there, like we're a dealer for HLS tubs, the cooked tubs, Hudson Livestock Supplements. They make a mineral energy tub. So even when protein isn't necessarily the issue, but you want your cattle to have a little more mineral or energy, they have those types of products as well.
So this next question, I think, goes back to a statement that you said earlier. What is wrong with calving on wheat?
What is wrong with calving on wheat? Oh, great question. Okay. Should I leave this screen up or can I come back and be a person on a computer?
Yeah, no, you can, if you want to share whichever screen, feel free.
Okay. Can you see me now?
I can still see your PowerPoint presentation. Now I just see you. Yes.
Now we can see me. Okay. Hope that's okay with everybody. Okay. So calving on wheat pasture. One of the biggest problems we have with calving on wheat pasture, especially if we're calving old cows, is we can get into some milk fever. And ultimately, wheat pasture is very high in phosphorus, which is why wheat pasture mineral is not high in phosphorus. As you guys have probably heard over the years, cows need a 2-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio. And ultimately, that gets upended on wheat pasture. Typically not a problem with yearlings, but on mama cows, when they start lactating, they have such a high requirement for calcium, but it's not 2-to-1 calcium to phosphorus. It's 1-to-5 calcium to phosphorus. And so it gets upended, which totally ruins the lactation system and calcium. And so the body, when it begins to lactate, will pull all of its available calcium from its blood and other storage places in the body and dump that into the milk. Ultimately, though, it depletes the blood calcium levels, which causes milk. This is what we call milk fever. And ultimately, that cow is then paralyzed. And you have to treat her with IV CMPK. I had a slide on that. Darn it. I should have just pulled that up. So we see milk fever more oftentimes if you're calving on wheat pasture with old mother cows that have big bags. The cows with larger bags are more prone to milk fever because they are making so much more milk. The other thing that can happen is that when you are calving on wheat pasture is so highly digestible that we end up with a lot of painted butts, right? A lot of manure score ones. We have a lot of loose manure going everywhere all of the time. And we see a higher occurrence of scours in calves because there's just poop everywhere. So those would be the two reasons I would say not to calve on wheat pasture. You can just avoid a lot of headache and heartache by drying those cows out. And if you are calving on wheat pasture, that's because it is what it is. I would strongly recommend you put out moderate to high quality hay as well, so that we can at least slow down the rate of passage so those cows are able to get a little more nutrition out of a drier diet. And those cows will really go to those dry forages, even on wheat pasture. If you notice on a wheat pasture pivot, the dry corners are always grazed. And so if we can slow down that rate of passage, sometimes we can reduce the amount of scouring and just the It just creates a very dirty environment for a baby calf.
What's your opinion on plowing bare land to increase absorbing even if ground is bare?
Leave it alone.
Okay.
Leave it alone. Um, if you can, if you're gonna, if you gotta do something about it, one of the most underrated things that I don't think get talked about anymore is planting tubers. Okay, if you've got bare ground like an old fallowed out field or something like that, planting tuber type crops like, now I'm drawing a blank, radishes, and then what's the other one that people plant? But if you're able to plant something like that in bare soil, that tuber creates an open pocket of space, and you don't even have to harvest it. In fact, if you plant a tuber type crop, you can go in and graze it. You know, it's all these common types of cover crops, right? If you can plant one of those, they will do more good. Basically, under the soil, they will create this pocket that in which they grow in, right? And then they die, and then they leave behind this wonderful pocket that allows for infiltration for more space. The soil isn't as compacted anymore. I would not recommend plowing for the sake of plowing. I would recommend, if you got to do something, you want to plant a cover crop, tuber crops are, we need to increase those that in popularity.
How often and when should you disc a pasture to promote growth and aerate the soil?
Um, I think maybe a lot, this question, last question, these guys are talking about maybe they're talking about more improved type pastures. Sorry, my brain is thinking native grass pastures, and I'm thinking you want to plow up a native grass pasture. Again, though, I wouldn't be so inclined to do a whole lot of dirt work. And you're all you're doing is turning over. If you're talking about like disking, you're just turning the soil over in a way that is bringing good soil that's been underneath the soil, or that's been underneath the top layer, and you're bringing that to the soil, and that's what's going to be what blows away next, as opposed to now aerating is totally different. That's I think that's a different machine, I guess, poking holes in the earth. I don't hate that. I mean, that's totally fine. I don't have a problem with aeration, but I don't know about just straight up disking it up and turning it over. I want to keep the good soil that's already underneath and not exposed to direct sunlight, where where all the microbes are. I want to keep that there for overall total soil health.
And just with our time, this will be our last question. So,
Okay.
feeding liquid feed during new pasture growth. What's your thoughts on it?
Oh, it's going to get political. Um, during new pasture growth,
Yes, feeding liquid feed during new pasture growth.
to the cattle. Okay. I would like to hope that new growth means good protein and energy levels, and that maybe we don't have to be supplementing at that point in time. But liquid feed, liquid. Okay, this is what I'll say about liquid feed. Liquid feed is very hard to justify economically because you are buying a lot of water, and but I'm not dismissing it necessarily. Um, Supplementation in general on new forage growth, if I'm thinking about maybe this question correctly, that we've just planted it, it's just coming on, we're going to feed supplementation to kind of keep them off of it. Any kind of supplementation would help to do that, but really it's still just supplementation. It's not true substitution, and substitution is what would more greatly help to minimize grazing on new forage growth, if that was the intended part of that question.
Well, they did not have any follow-ups, so
I don't know if I answered that question, but
that's
thank
okay.
you. Thank you for all of your time today, everybody, and thank you for all the wonderful questions. My phone number is available on the HiPro website. If you ever need anything, feel free to call me. I'm always happy to answer questions. And if you did ask a question today and you want to follow up with me on it, if I didn't answer it to your satisfaction or I missed it completely, just call me or email me and I'll try again.
Well, thank you for joining us, Sarah Jane. And yes, if anyone had any questions today that did not get answered, please feel free to reach out to Sarah Jane, or you can reach out to us at education@tscra.org, and we will pass that question along to hopefully get an answer for you. But just wanted to thank everyone else who joined us for today's Ranching 101 webinar, and we hope everyone has a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you all on April 21st for our next Ranching 101 webinar. We will discuss parasite control. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks, Sarah Jane.
Thanks, Bryn. Thanks,
Have a good one.
everybody.